a lesson plan, a lesson itself sort of plays out in forward motion, okay? So typically, right, at least in my discipline, what seems to be customary is that you assign some kind of reading, pre-reading, have some kind of exposure to a content. There's some kind of instruction, there's some kind of engagement or project or something going on in the class, assignments, tests, and at the end you get to your educated student. And it's natural because that's how things usually play out. However, a lesson plan is different from planning a lesson. And that's what this backwards design is talking about. It's not talking about the order of teaching, it's talking about the order of your process of preparing to teach, okay? And it begins with the end, right? What's the goal you want students to reach? Then you move from the goal to what is good evidence that they have achieved that goal. That's where the assessments come in, okay? And only then would you get to the learning experiences that will get them to that goal. That's really challenging for me teaching theology because, you know, I've got paper assignments that I like, and I tend to write paper assignments, but, you know, it's hard to think about, okay, but is this paper assignment totally unrelated to what we've done in the course, which often happens with research papers? And have I actually kind of taught in a way that prepares them to do that well, right? So how do you keep it all kind of connected, okay? So that is backward design in a nutshell, that you plan backwards and you move forwards, okay? Identify desired results, determine acceptable evidence, plan learning experiences. Another graphic here. Stage one, to identify the desired results. Okay. Some guiding questions are, what are the established goals that you have inherited, either from your school curriculum or your departmental learning objectives or the USCCB or whatever? What's out there that you are, the space that you are free to move within? So moving from established goals, what are the big ideas we want our students to understand? How can we turn those into essential questions, or are there knowledge or skills that want to be acquired? And then again, determine acceptable evidence. What's sufficient evidence of understanding? What assessment methods would yield this evidence? What performance tasks should anchor the unit? Wiggins and McTighe covered a lot of ground in a few pages, right? So we're just kind of going to break these apart. And then finally, plan learning experiences. What instructional and learning strategies are needed so that the students can complete stage 2 tasks and so achieve stage 1 goals. Okay, another good thing about lifting up these the textbook example or the Bishop's curriculum framework is to say there's just way too much. And so Wiggs and McTighe suggest a strategy for prioritizing them, and I find this kind of helpful. I'm going to ask you to do it too. So you can think of them as like kind of these expanding circles. This is taken right from the textbook, right? The most important, right, are the enduring understandings. I joked last time, right? What's most important in this course I teach on the Sacred Quest? Is it to remember the dates of Babylonian exile? I'm delighted if you remember the dates of the Babylonian exile, but I would think it would be it's not one of the enduring understandings I'm going for. Okay. Actually, in that I teach a course, the Sacred Quest. Some of you have taken it. And I think that down deep, one of the most important enduring understandings I want students to take away from that course is the importance of context in interpreting and understanding another, right? Like that's where we look at the Genesis stories, we talk about historical context and so on, but ultimately I'm trying to get across this point that if you ever want to understand anyone, right, the first question to ask is, where are they coming from? What's their context? So that's the kind of critical analysis. So what are the big ideas that you want students to retain long after they've forgotten many of the details? What will be most transformative? Okay. And that's going to be few. That's not going to be 17 things for any single class. That's going to be a handful. But then there are going to be 17 or so other things that are the essential facts, concepts, and teaching that anyone finishing this course really needs to know. Okay. If they leave my class thinking that the Babylonian exile happened after Jesus, that to me would be really disappointing. Worth being familiar with. What's the broader context or ideas that students should at least encounter in such a class? Interesting and important, but not as vital to their education. So there's a lot of stuff that you cover, but you kind of constantly have to be thinking. Like if you find yourself spending so much of the course memorizing dates, and if so much of the exam, so many of the points are about dates, and you have to ask yourself, is that really what you want to be doing? Maybe it is, but if it's not, then you need to kind of reevaluate how you're grading and what kind of tests you're giving and how you're spending your class time. Educational theorists acknowledge this. So this isn't just kind of warm and fuzzy because it's a theology or religious education, but an education, this recognition that we are not just disembodied brains, but that we are whole persons, and that it is legitimate to talk about learning outcomes that are not just ideas in the head. Not that ideas in the head are bad, but in addition to the cognitive, there's also the affective and the behavioral. Think, value. What do we want students to understand, to appreciate? Value is wrong. To understand, to appreciate, and the skills. I think we have. If you put these two together and think about the type and the priority, that this is one way I kind of visualize it, is that there can be enduring understandings at each of these types, cognitive, affective, behavioral. Not every class has to fill in all 9 boxes. In fact, that would probably be a disaster. Not every course has to fill in all of these. These are just options. Okay, after identifying the desired results, I always want to jump to, like, I got me on the goals, I can do that. And then I always want to jump to kind of, okay, what are we going to do in class? And I have to really work hard to kind of say, okay, what is the acceptable evidence? And what is sufficient evidence of understanding? What assessment methods would yield this evidence? What performance tasks should you anchor the unit? And the text offers, I think, a helpful continuum of the kinds of assessment mechanisms or methods. At one end, kind of most demanding or substantive or thorough is some performance task or project. Blank, for example, developing a portfolio for a course, applying the skills what we've learned in TRS 5380. An academic prompt, I'll go into more detail about all of these, is an open-ended question. Quiz or a test, you know what those look like, and even within a test, there's a range of assessment. You can have an essay exam, you can have a short essay exam, you can have fill in the blank, you can have multiple choice. Observation dialogue, I've heard examples of that already, and you were saying you go around and give a couple of points to when so that is an assessment measure that you are looking over their shoulder and seeing that they're doing the work, or informal checks for understanding. So like that is a legitimate assessment measure. Like, right, are your students following you? You ask, are you following me? Or, just kind of like checking in with them. That's giving you feedback that allows you to know whether they're progressing towards your goals. So that whole range is all legitimate. Now, students are going to really complain, right, if 90% of the grade is based on these informal checks for understanding, right? And I would think that that's probably not great pedagogy if you're just saying, do you understand? I understand. Okay, A for the class, right? There's got to be better evidence, but it's to help you kind of adjust. The textbook breaks these down with a little bit more detail, and I think that this overlaps with the difference between enduring understandings and it's nice to know about things. So just as a way of thinking about the variety of options that are out there. So quiz and test items are simple content-focused questions. So this is focused on, do you know the days of the Babylonian exile? They're good for assessing factual information, concepts, and discrete skills. And they're convergent. In other words, they have a single best answer. Academic prompts, these are open-ended questions or problems that require the student to think critically, not just recall knowledge, and then to prepare a response, product, or performance. Okay, so that's, I think, the key difference there. That can be an essay assignment, like write a 5-page paper on this, or it can be a homework assignment, write a 1-paragraph response, or it can be a quiz question. They require constructive responses under school or exam conditions. They are open. There's not a single best answer or best strategy for answering or solving them. Involve analysis, synthesis, or evaluation. Typically require an explanation or defense of the answer given or method used. Require judgment-based scoring on criteria and performance standards. So you start to get into kind of rubrics. And then kind of at the high end are these performance tasks and projects that challenges that mirror the issues and problems faced by adults. So they are authentic, meaning that they're not contrived, like a lot of assignments are contrived. Do you have a sense of that? Different kinds of assessment? Just to show what the textbook shows here in terms of like there's a natural kind of overlap between different kinds of assessments and different degrees of centrality of goals. Traditional quizzes and tests are best for assessing the larger penumbra of these, worth being familiar with, important to know and to do, whereas performance tasks and projects, more open, complex, authentic, are better for getting at these enduring understandings. Okay, friends, welcome back to the final push here. We won't spend obviously as much time on this last stage today, but we will certainly spend time on it. After identifying their desired results, determine the acceptable evidence, then we want to plan learning experiences that will equip our students in order to accomplish the tasks in stage 2 that will demonstrate their ability to achieve stage 1. And this moves us from chapter 1 in the design, understanding by design, to chapter 8, where we read about this acronym that can be used as kind of criteria or checkboxes for any discrete learning experience. In any good class, students should understand where the unit is headed and why. That there should be an attempt to hook the student and hold their attention. To equip students with experiences, skills, and knowledge. To give them opportunities to rethink, reflect, and revise. And then ensure that students can evaluate their progress, self-assess, and also allow you to self-assess. We stress here that the WHARE acronym serves more as a criterion for design than a chronology or step-by-step recipe. WHARE represents a way of testing lessons and units rather than a recipe for building them. So there's a kind of a natural flow to the WHARE, but when we think about WHARE, this is not the kind of recipe or the steps of a class, but it is like the criteria that you use to judge a class, like all these elements here. So in other words, every individual class doesn't necessarily move from that. And this is hard for me because it kind of works well to move W-H-E-R-E, but it doesn't always. And in fact, the hook is often the best way in. So let me just take each of these in turn and then give you a chance to react to the reading. Why? Because work has to be purposeful from the student's point of view. Okay? So part of this is like just explaining to students. Again, it's kind of a metacognition thing but what you're doing, what we're going to do today, and why we're going to do it. Hook students in the beginning hold their attention throughout. I think that teachers with no background kind of realize that this is kind of important. Want students to be engaged. Here's how I think about it. Tap into intrinsic motivation early on. Yes, a motivator can be, it's going to be on the test, but that's external and not the most effective. Is there some way that this is meaningful? Or another way I think about it is like, what are naturally occurring questions? Why was I confirmed in 8th grade, but my cousin who lives in Indiana was confirmed in 3rd grade? Like, why? Right? That's an opening to kind of get into a subject. What did the book say? The education should be an itch, not a scratch. And ideally, the hook should lead into the lesson. That's another easy mistake, is to have a hook that has nothing to do with what you're covering that day, right? That's not a hook. Doing a kind of a fun game or something at the beginning of the class is not a hook, because it doesn't hook you into the learning that you're trying to do that day. And inevitably what happens is that they have a lot of fun at the beginning, and then they zone out when you make the transition. It's clear, like, okay, fun's over, now we got to do this. But the hook is meant to draw them into the topic, not to entertain them. Okay, equip students with necessary experiences, tools, knowledge, and know-how to meet performance goals. The whole active learning thing, right? This is kind of has become very common recognition that the sage up on the stage is not the best pedagogical paradigm, like that students, whoever does the work does the learning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we do provide something as teachers, right? We have a certain amount of knowledge and experience to share. So the task is to think about, how do we make students partners in this learning process? So how do we, and I think that I like the language of equip. Like what are you going to provide them so that they can kind of do something with it? Opportunities to reflect, rethink. This is about developing critical thinking skills, and then ensure you have opportunities for students to exhibit what they've learned in some way. And that gets into what we've been talking about up until now in terms of the assessment.